Hello, artists. This is Mrs. P. Welcome to Umaarteng Penmanship. For today's video, I will be teaching you how to paint a realistic rose like this. Taking realistic painting, you need to start with a drawing. That's also what I learned from the book Realistic Painting Learn to Paint Step by Step by Daniel K. Tannen. I'll show you a book cover here. It's a very good watercolor book where you can learn the process step by step. So to start our painting, we will draw the rose first. I got a photo from Pixabay. Pixabay is a website where you can download high quality photos for painting that you could use for free. I am using a 3H pencil, so sorry if you can't see my drawing. One tip that I can give you is to draw very lightly that you can see, but also erase more of the pencil marks before you start painting because you can't erase the pencil marks once the paint is dry. To know in which areas that it should add a shadow and darken, on the left, you'll see how I simply edit a photo from color to black and white. I made the photo black and white using my phone editor and I selected silver tone so I can see clearly which areas that I can focus on. This way, I have two reference photos, a colored and the black and white. I use three colors from my Mungyo professional watercolor set. I use permanent rose for the flower. I also use sap green for the shadows and Prussian blue for the background. In this video, you'll see how I use one color in different values. I started to paint using the permanent rose, the center of the flower, and I also added more pigment on the areas that are dark. I am also showing the reference photos on the left. If you'll try to make a realistic rose watercolor painting, you can use the same reference photo. I'll put the link on the description box. If you will observe the photo carefully, you'll see some areas are lighter. That's where the light from the sun, and some areas are darker, like at the center of the rose or inside the petal. I added more pigment on this side. That's where showing a darker area of the rose. If you notice, the lighter value on this petal shows a dimension that the petal is folded. If you observe the rose, it is petal over a petal. To divide the petals, the next petal is either lighter or darker. In this way, you can always go back to your reference photo to know where you can add more pigment. If you painted a darker petal or a darker area, you can dip your brush on the water and remove the excess. Then you can soften the edge of the last area that you painted so you can make also a lighter value of the same color. Whenever I do a realistic rose like this, I do not always get the exact shape on the photo. It is either I cannot see the pencil mark or I didn't get the exact shape of the petal. Don't worry, that's totally fine. You don't have to get the exact as it is, as long as your rose is close enough to the reference photo. In watercolor and sketching, I learned not to get all of the details, but some details can be simplified. You can either remove some or add some details. In this petal, you'll see I added a darker value of the pigment. Then I dip my brush to my water and remove the excess water to paint a lighter value. I added also a darker value on the left. Remember to dab your brush to a paper towel to remove the excess water and avoid puddling on your paper. By the way, all of the materials I use in this tutorial and reference photo link will be on the description box. Also, you can use other colors like yellow, pink, or blue. You can check on Pixabay on different colors of the rose. It's just red is my favorite. I also added a tiny amount of sap green on the pigment rose for the shadows of the flower. Just a tiny amount of the complementary color is good to make a shadow, but adding the same amount of color will make it brown. Complementary colors are the colors that are opposite on the color wheel. You can always go back to the color wheel for your reference. In this rose in painting light to dark is to add more pigment. To paint dark to light is to wash your brush a bit and remove the excess water. To add the shadow is to add a tiny amount of complementary color that is sap green. I did it in these rows over and over. By the way, I also made a watercolor loose rose bouquet tutorial, and if you haven't seen that, you could check the card that will pop up at the top of this video later, or you could see the link by the end of this tutorial and also on the description box below. I'm finishing all of the petals, and it's just the first layer. I will add more shadows and details afterwards. In this petal, same technique, I added a dark shade first, then I washed my brush a bit for the lighter shade of the petal. Also, at first, since I do not know how to draw, it was very difficult for me. If you have a hard time drawing like me, I suggest getting a picture online or your own captured photo, then go to rapidresizer.com. It has a feature that you can convert a photo into drawing. It can help you, but since roses are my favorite flowers and I'm familiar with the image of the rose, I can draw it. It's still best to learn drawing if you would like to make realistic paintings. Honestly, I do not draw most of the time. It's a challenge for me since childhood. But then, with the technology nowadays, I can learn to draw on a step-by-step process, and reading more art books with the daily challenges helps me a lot. I messed up with the petal below and I overlooked it. When I look into the photo again, it shows division at the middle, but then I will correct my mistake by adding a shadow on that area later. I'm adding a darker value on this area, not the full petal, but some. In this way, it can help to show a dimension that is a separate petal from the other that is inside, and the tip will pop up more and will show a dimension that is folded or furled. I added a second layer on the petal below because when it will dry, it will surely lighten a bit. Moving on to the top area of the rose, I'm still missing some petals, so I'm adding it now. Make sure to make a darker area on the separation of each petal to show a shadow and division. So your rose won't look flat and it won't look like one huge petal. This way you can make your rose in three-dimensional look. The first time I tried to make a realistic rose, it took me almost 3 hours. I think it took me 30 to 45 minutes long just drawing the rose. But when you get used to doing this, the time is lesser than the first time. When I checked my time, it took me 45 minutes in total from drawing, painting the rose, adding the background, and adding the details. I added more pigmented permanent rose color to the center of the flower. Then I have my sap green and Prussian blue for the background. I did wet on wet for the background. I randomly drop the colors. Sometimes it is just green or I mix both to add more interest. Also, the dark area of the rose, it is good to maintain a light shade of the other color and add more pigment beside the light area. Here it is playing the contrast of the colors. If you want to maintain the light color of the area in your painting, you can paint the side area darker. It is called negative painting. It will help to pop up the lighter area more. If you add the background like this, be careful not to wet the area where you painted the rose and carefully paint the size of the rose. By the way, I forgot to mention that I use a round brush, Kolinsky sable brush, size 4. For the background, you could use a bigger round brush or a mop brush, but carefully paint the size of the flower for easier and faster painting. You can also use other colors for the background like olive green or gray. I decided sap green and Prussian blue because it looks cool to the eyes and it is complementary colors. Almost done with the rose. I'm just adding more details and shadows where it should be. I added more pigmented permanent rose at the middle of the flower. The middle area is always dark except if the rose is fully bloomed and open. I continue adding more pigment near the light area. Again, this is a negative painting. It will help to pop up the lighter area of the rose petals. Those light areas of the petals will serve as the folded area when you look into the rose. It will help also to separate the petal from the other petal. Remember not to overwork your painting. I suggest taking a break for 3 to 5 minutes, looking around, and when you go back to your painting, you will see which areas that you still need to work on, or if you overwork your painting, or is it time to stop. Another thing to do is to ask other eyes, especially those who will see your work in your reference photo for the first time. They can spot the difference from the photo to your painting easily. That also helps me because whenever I paint and my eyes are used to see the same image, that is hard for me to see what's missing or what needs to be fixed. It is better to observe your reference photo well and mark the areas that you would like to add focus. That's what you call planning your work. It can help you finish your painting faster. This is the area that I mentioned earlier that I overlooked. I needed the eyes of someone to help me out to notice that. I added more pigment to the lower area, emphasized the division as well as the shadow of the petal. I also added some lines on this petal as a details. I also added more pigment on the background using sap green and Prussian blue to pop up more of the pink color. Here, I make sure that I blend the colors properly because it is the second layer and the first layer of the background is dry. I make sure that I also soften the edges for smooth texture. I also added a division below, but sorry, I wasn't able to capture that. The battery of my camera was so low, but I'll show you a photo of my finished work. I hope you learned something in this tutorial. If you do this realistic rose painting, please mention me or tag me on Instagram or Facebook. Here's a closer look at my finished work, and here is a full picture and my other rose painting. For more watercolor painting tutorials, calligraphy, journaling, and art materials review, please consider subscribing to my channel.